Hey everyone, in this video we're going to create a React component. So in one of the previous videos we created a simple React application. So we went and we started off by using npm to create our boilerplate React application. So if you don't know how to do that, go and check the previous React video. And then we deleted some of the stuff out of that file and we messed around and added a couple of things in. But in this video, we're starting off at the same point, but this time we're going to go and just create a component. So if I go to my command line and I just do npm start, this is going to start up our React application in the browser, and we can see this is our basic React template. So if I go back to our IDE, we can see that we've got this app function, this app component, and within this app component we have a couple of things. So we have a div and a header and an image and a paragraph, and that's what we see when we go and look at our web browser here. So what we want to do is we want to add a new component to this, and we're going to put this new component down here at the very bottom. So you could imagine this as being like a footer. So usually you have a header at the top, and then you have your main content of your web page, and then you might have a footer at the bottom. So we're going to add a footer at the bottom of our web page. So the first thing we need to do is to create a component, right? And we can name our component whatever we want. So it's usually good practice to go and have a separate folder for our different components. So inside our source folder here, we can go and add a directory, and we can call this directory components. So if you're making a large scale application, this is where you'd put in all your components, and then you might go and separate your components into other subfolders inside this one. But for this example, we're only creating one component, so we don't need to create any subfolders. We're going to call it my first component. So it's my first component.js, and we need to go and create something inside of this component. So I'm going to just go to app.js. I'm going to go to this component, and I'm going to just copy everything that's inside our app.js, and I'm going to paste it into our newly created component, which is my first component. So the first thing that we're going to need to change is going to be the name. So as you can see, we just copied this from the app component, so we're going to need to change this and this. So this is the name of our component. You can call this anything, but I'm going to call this my first component. So now we've named our function my first component, we need to make sure that we export the right component. So we just need to change this from app to my first component also. And we don't want all this information inside it. So maybe we just want to keep this paragraph here. So we'll get rid of this header because it's not needed. And we can also get rid of the anchor tag and the image as well. We'll keep the div there for the minute. We can delete this thing at the top that imports the app.css. We could leave it in, but just to make things really simple, it's not needed. So we can delete that out just to make our file as small as possible. So we've got a class name set here to app. So app again is the name of the previous one. We don't have to change this, but my first component is not the best name when you're naming components. But the reason why I'm naming it my first component is just to give you an idea of how you create your first components. I don't want to call it like app2 or index or something like that, which might confuse you if you're familiar with developing other applications in different programming languages or frameworks. So in this paragraph, we don't really want this either. So we could just go and say my first component. So this paragraph, it's going to just display out 3 words, my first component. And now that we have our component created, we need to go and implement it. We need to go and add it. So for example, if we go back to our browser, if we go and save this and we go to our browser, we're not going to see anything, right? So even if we refresh or whatever, it's still exactly the same. And that's because we've created our first component, but we haven't added it in anywhere. We haven't said, oh, we want it to be displayed, on the top of the page or the bottom of the page or anything. So we need to go to our app component because that's the component that is being displayed onto the screen. And we need to import my first component. So to do this, the first thing we need to do is use the import keyword at the very top of our app.js file. And then we're going to open up a set of quotes. I'm going to say dot, which represents the current directory we're in. So, for example, we're looking at app here. So app is inside this source folder, and so is app.css, and so is components. So that's why we use dot. If we wanted to go back a directory, we could use dot dot and then our /, but components is in the same directory as app. If we go /, now we select components, and now within components we want to go and select my first component.js. So to do this, we just say / and select my first component.js. So now that we've got this, we want to go and add it in. So if we wanted to add it in at the top of our file as like a header, we would put it here. So just inside our div. But we're going to put ours at the bottom. So we're going to put it after this header here. And to do this, we are just going to use a less than sign and a greater than sign and put a / at the end just before the greater than sign. That's important. So what we can do now is we can see what our output is like in our web browser. So when I try and save this, I'm actually getting a compiler error because I've made one small little mistake. I should be importing something from this here. So if I go to my IDE, it tells me what I'm missing. So it says we should be importing my first component from / components / my first component. So I'm going to just select that, and we can delete this one because that's the one where we made the mistake. So if I go and save this now, you can see that it is compiled successfully. Now if we go back to our web browser, we should see something a little bit different. And if you scroll down, you can see my first component. So this is what's being displayed. This is the component that we just created. So if we go back here, and let's say we can see my first component is being displayed at the very bottom. If we were to take this and for some reason we wanted to have it at the top of the page, we could do this. So again, we're going to need to save our file and then go back to our browser. And now if we scroll up, we can see my first component at the top rather than at the bottom. So one thing just to keep in mind when you're creating components inside other components is that you can have as many components as you want inside another component. So for example, we have this app component here that has my first component. I could make a second component called my second component, and I could make a third component called my third component. And I could put all these components inside this app component. That's fine, but they need to be wrapped in a div, or there needs to be a div containing all of the components. So for example, if I was to get my first component and I was to put it outside the div here, and I was to go and try and compile this, it would give out say that it must be wrapped in a single element, because the problem that we have here is when React is trying to render this, we have two separate components. So we have this div here, or we have this block of JSX, and then we have this second component or second block of JSX. It doesn't understand how to render that to the screen. Now you could do another div that contained this div and my first component. That's just something to keep in mind when you're using many different components inside the one. That's just something to keep in mind. You're using multiple components inside another single component. So we'll put my first component back here, And now we can go and make changes in my first component without touching this app.js, because this app.js is just going to go and render whatever my first component is. So if I was to change this to maybe say my second component, and we were to go and save this and then go back to our browser, you can see it now says my second component. So that's how we can go and make changes. I hope you understand React components a little bit better now. If you did like the video, leave a like. If you want to see future videos, hit that subscribe button. Have a good day.